A very common question that I get all the time about wedding photography is, I want to be a wedding photographer. What is the minimum amount of gear that you recommend? Well, here's the thing. I've actually heard of photographers going out there and photographing a wedding. Let's call them photographers. One camera, one lens, one memory card, and then you go out and photograph a wedding. It's irresponsible. I've got to say, guys, that when we're photographing a wedding, there's got to be a certain kind of redundancy that we have to account for. And there's always a backup. We can always do something as best as we can under the circumstances, within the budget that we have, with the gear that's current that we have, and so on. So what I want to talk about now is the minimum gear that I recommend for weddings. At an absolute minimum, this is what I believe you need. In other words, you do not even put yourself out there as a potential wedding photographer until you have this kind of a gear. And then I'll talk about a bit more about what's a well-rounded kit that I believe, after all these years, this is what I believe would work. We'll talk a bit about lens compression and different characteristics of lenses. And also we'll talk towards the end about what is the day before a wedding look like? What's the ritual that us photographers do who photograph weddings go through? So let's talk about it. What is the minimum gear I recommend for weddings? Well, 2 cameras. You have to have it just at least 2. There's going to be a time where you'll drop a camera, and what do you do then? Well, yeah, you can grab your iPhone out and maybe take some photographs like that, but 2 cameras is going to work. One for, you might need it as a backup. You might need 2 angles, especially if you're photographing with a digital camera. You are going to want to minimize the times you actually take your lens off and allow dust to get onto your sensor. So what I try to do is, when I'm photographing with 2 cameras, 80 to 90% of my weddings will actually be photographed with the 1 camera, because I might use the 70-200 90% of the time, or the 85 1.8 most of the time. If I do that, then my go-to camera, I'm minimizing the time I take the lens off and put it back on, which means I'll have less dust spots on the camera that's going to be used the most. Then the other camera is my second angle, but it's usually the one that's going to be abused a little bit more, where I basically use different lenses on there too. But please, as of 2020 and beyond, my suggestion is that 2 cameras is what you'll need. And I think it's sort of, I would say it's fair enough to say that there should be a minimum of 20 megapixels plus. That's what I would recommend. And in most of the camera systems, and I've got to say, guys, it doesn't matter what camera system that I use, at the end of the day, the camera is a tool. And I've got to say that all the camera systems at the moment, anyone who's anyone, they're pretty damn good. They're really amazing. So you've got to pick your favorite system. My suggestion for you is to actually arguably rent the potential camera system that you want to buy. Use it, practice with it, because every camera will feel different in your hands. You might have cameras for different needs. So rent it, you feel good about it, love the quality, go for it. Invest your money wisely and go from there. I would rather rather than invest in a cheaper camera, or lenses or anything like that, I'd rather you just rent until you can afford to buy. There's no shame in that. In fact, it's probably even better for you financially, because of how you can claim it and all those kinds of things, and you can keep updating the cameras. And if you're only shooting 10 to 20 weddings a year, you'll be surprised that, like, if you want to keep updated with the gear that's always current, it might be a good way for you to go. But I'll leave that up to you. 2 cameras is what you need. 2 speed lights. You know, you're going to want to be able to use on-camera flash. Now, I use on-camera flash and I bounce it in a way where it doesn't look like flash. So I recommend that you learn that. And of course, if you've learned from me, you'll understand how to do that. But 2 speed lights is what you need. And of course, you've got 1 speed light on each of the cameras. And of course, you've got a backup if one goes on the camera that you're using. At an absolute minimum, 2 lenses, a 24 to 70, is going to be a good all-rounder that you can actually use. Of course, your wide 24 would be amazing. And then the 70mm, it just gives you a bit of a range to play with. And of course, you carry on that 70mm to 200 with a second lens. Now, just going back to the cameras for a second, I would recommend a full-frame camera. It's just nice to know that your 70 to 200 is in fact 70 to 200. Rather, if you go with the closer crop or the DX crop, or depending on your camera system, it's going to basically, like a 70 to 200 will be a 150 to 300. Its full frame is just easier, more predictable. You know what you're seeing, and that's basically it. You might grab one of those cameras that have a different crop ratio and factor where you're photographing in a safari environment, for example, where you want your lenses to be double the focal length or so on. A reflector is such an amazing tool to have. I would recommend it at least a minimum of a 5-in-1 reflector. That's going to be great for you. Of course, memory cards, you know, these days you can get 128 gig, you get 256. I mean, you can shoot a whole wedding on one card and won't have any problem with having to replace it during the day. There's argument to say, you know, you should basically change cards on every location, like there's a card for the grooms, a card for the brides, and so on, and then at least you break up the issue of only having one card to rely upon. Well, my argument is that the likelihood of, you know, fumbling a card, missing the card, having to reformat a card out of those 6 or 7 is probably more likely for that to happen than your one card in your camera being a problem. And again, depending on, obviously I'd recommend a camera with 2 card slots if that exists with your camera system in the camera system that you desire. And if not, of course, you can actually tether to your phone and then you have a backup that way as well. I would recommend a continuous light. It's going to be nice to sometimes where you want the predictability of being able to turn a light on and then illuminate whoever you're photographing, whether it's for detail shots, whether it's for a beautiful artistic portrait, whatever it may be. I think this would be a really good minimum gear kit to photograph a wedding. And of course, you should know your camera's back to front. Please read your manual because the camera can do so much more than what you think. No different than a video game where you go to play a game, like a video game, PlayStation or Nintendo, whatever it may be, and then you just can only get so far in the game because you don't know this combination of buttons that could open up a whole world of creativity. No different than a camera. So please read your camera manual, both for your camera manual and your speed light manual. But that is what I recommend at a minimum. If I had to afford to drop one thing, I'd say continuous light, important to have, not a deal breaker. Take the continuous light away if you can't afford it. If you can't afford the reflector, take that away, but they're pretty affordable. The rest is just a given. You just have to have 2 cameras, you have to have 2 lenses, and you have to have 2 speed lights. Now, what is a well-rounded kit for weddings look like? Well, here's what I recommend. Again, I recommend 2 cameras for your wedding. If you have a 3rd camera, that's fantastic as well, because there's going to be times where you've got 2 cameras going. Like, let's say there's a bigger wedding, there's lots of cultural things happening, ritual things are happening. You've got a camera, let's say on the bride and the groom, doing a speech. You've got the reactions of the speeches by a 2nd camera. And let's say if one dies, you know, I'd probably push that up to 3 cameras I'm saying well-rounded as in here are the extras that I would include. But if you can't afford it, you're okay. You can survive without it. But yes, 3 would be better than 2, of course. More than 3, I think, is a bit overkill, depending on the size of the wedding. So I'll let you guys be the judge of that. Speed lights, again, 2 speed lights and a remote trigger. So I didn't touch upon the remote trigger before, but the remote trigger is quite important because there's going to be times where you want the flash off camera. You want to create a bit of a direction of light, a bit of a shadow. You want to backlight your subject. So a remote trigger is great. And there's many out there, of course, for many camera systems. Work out the one that you actually like. I would suggest going on YouTube and looking at some reviews by people that you know and you trust and you respect. And that would be great. Speed light modifiers. There's many companies out there that actually make modifiers that fit on your flash that help you sort of soften the light, broaden the light, and all these different things. So I would suggest looking into those. A portable strobe. I would say 500 watt. If you want to overpower the sun, you are going to need a portable strobe. When I say need it, you don't have to have it. You can do it with a speed light. Of course, you can do it with 2 speed lights. But sometimes you just want the ease of getting out a strobe. 500 watts, bang, you can just go ahead and do it. And of course, a portable softbox, maybe like a 24-inch softbox at a minimum, obviously with a light stand. Something like that would be good because you may be on your own. You want to photograph the bride and groom at a beach. And what do? Of course, light stand, strobe, or speed light, and you can go your merry way. Lenses, the way I would expand it, and in fact, this is sort of what I bring with me on a wedding day, although I have more lenses than this. This is sort of my kit that I bring. My sort of golden rule is that if I can fit it in one camera bag, it comes with me. Now, yes, I've got a 2nd bag with lighting, but you know, the lenses are all in the same bag. 14 to 24, 2.8, 24 to 70, 2.8, 70 to 200, 2.8, a macro lens at 2.8, so 105. So most camera systems will have a version of a macro. So I have the 105. Other systems will have a 100. It just depends on what you want. And also you need something that has a shallow depth. So something at 1.2, something at 1.4, in my case 1.8. 1.8 is great because you're not playing with fire too much, because if you're photographing on an eyeball or an eye socket, like at 1.8, like at 1.2 or even at 0.95, you're playing with fire. You can very rarely get any kind of movement shots with anything sort of shallower. I like the 1.8 because it sort of forces me to stop there rather than play with fire and go shallower. Although it's certainly nice to have, and if you're in a controlled environment on a tripod or someone's closer to you, it's more predictable. Memory cards are important. Please don't have just enough for 1,000 shots. You have to overestimate quite ridiculously. I'm not a loose shooter. I find I'm very controlled and measured when I photograph, but I tend to find that I always have enough for 2 to 3 weddings with me at all times. I very rarely change cards because I'm usually at a 128 gig card in both cameras, and I can't remember the last time I had to change a card on a particular wedding day. But make sure you have enough. Make sure you also have a routine when you're photographing. So I have a very hard case that I hold my memory card in, my XQD cards. So what I do is that when they're used, I turn them and flip them upside down. And that's a red flag. Do not touch anything that's flipped around. Which reminds me that when you're photographing, make sure you do never leave a wedding unformatted on your card on a wedding. And trust me, I have done this before. You've probably done this before, whereas you start photographing a wedding and then you look back at your photographs and you scroll back and you realize you have like 2 weeks ago wedding on the friggin' card. Now, you don't know how many photographs you have left. Now, you can't really format the card, and now you can't delete them individually, and then you're running out of card space. What do you do? So don't make that mistake. Make sure, and we'll talk about this very shortly, talking about the day before wedding ritual as photographers that we should do, that your cards are all formatted, they're all empty, they're ready to rock, there's some in your camera, there's some spare ones, and you know your system and you stick to it. Of course, I would suggest a reflector, as I said before. A continuous light, of course, is a well-rounded part of your kit for your weddings. A tripod, I don't use a tripod often for weddings, but there's going to be times where you want deliberate movement, you want this beautiful glide and sea of movement, maybe with the bride and groom standing and kissing on the dance floor, and they're static and stationary, everything's moving around them. I mean, there's so many cool things you can do with the tripod. And then sometimes you're doing family portraits and you're doing 50 families in a row, and to bring your camera up and down is going to be a real pain in the butt. So, you know, you might want to predictably put your camera on a tripod. That's going to suffice for most of the shots that you take, and then life is good. And of course, a camera case is going to be a fun thing for you too. I first wanted to talk about camera gear in general, rather than be too specific with what I use, because really, guys, I don't want there to be a war on what's best and Jerry uses this or he doesn't do that or whatever. I'm telling you now, all camera systems, I mean, of the current crop of brands are pretty amazing. At the end of the day, you end up investing in a certain type of equipment because it serves your needs, it works well, you grow with it, and there comes a point where if it doesn't grow with your needs, then you might switch, and that's okay. But it's not about the gear, guys. I've been talking about this all along. The gear is important. We are specifically talking about gear right now, but you just have to understand how to use it and connect with your subjects. To be more specific, as of 2020, the cameras that I use currently are the Z6 and the Z7. Of course, they're mirrorless cameras. I also have the D850, I also have the D5, and I'll use them from time to time on weddings, other than the mirrorless, for different reasons. If I'm photographing, let's say, at a very dark crypt of a church and I can't use flash, well, the D5 is going to perform exceptionally well. You know, the D850 I might use for filmmaking. Now, the Z6 and the Z7 are incredible. They have their uses. My Z6 is going to be my go-to camera for wedding camera, and the Z7 would be my go-to portrait, fashion, and anything non-wedding. But of course, that'll change and evolve, and it perhaps could even change by the time you're watching this video. But either way, I know a lot of people ask me, and I thought I'd share with you right now. The speedlights, I have some SB910s, which are amazing. And of course, I have SB5000s with the WR10 and the WRA10, which is the trigger and and the transmitter and the receiver. The speed light modifiers, I actually don't use many modifiers at all, but when I do, MagMod actually sell a great bunch of gear and kit for your flashes. But also I like to use Westcott products and ProPhoto products. So between the softboxes that I use, they're actually amazing. So Westcott modifiers are incredible. The portable strobe, as of 2020 and beyond, I'm using the ProPhoto B10 Plus, and it's a 500 watt globe a flash, and it also has continuous light. It's got lots of power. It comes with a really cool trigger, the TTL Air Remote for the Nikon, and that's amazing. And also you can get a digital one that will fire off an A1 or an A1X or a B10 Plus. So it depends on you and what you believe about that, what you prefer. Portable softbox, like I said, I use Westcott products. They're amazing. And I've got the lenses, as we discussed, in the Nikon range. Memory cards, I use XQD, and CF Express is imminent, and I believe they're already out and about in the XQD format. I haven't played with them yet, so I'm looking forward to the quality and performance and the reliability of the CF Express in the XQD format. A reflector, as of 2020, I'm using the Omega reflector, which I invented. It's the world's first 15-in-1 reflector, so check that out. You'll love that. Continuous light, I also invented the Ice Light, and it's an incredible portable light with lots of uses and is absolutely amazing, and that'll actually help your life be a lot easier on a wedding day. And a tripod, there's so many brands out there. Pick the one that actually suits your needs the best, and it's a combination of what's usable, what's light, what you could travel with, and what serves your needs. In fact, the one that you take with you on a wedding day might be a simpler, smaller version than the one that you keep in your studio. And as far as the camera case, as of 2020, I used a roller derby or roller derby, a think tank bag, which is amazing because it's a carry-on size and there's wheels on it. It's just a well-rounded case that actually works really well. What lenses do I have? There's a few more than what's on this list, but you know, if you want to get crazy, 70-200 2.8 is amazing. The f4 version is really fun because it's actually a light lens, and yes, you're sacrificing an f-stop, but you actually, the lens becomes so much smaller and so much lighter. So if you're like me and you're in your late 40s and you've got a back problem, it might be a great lens for you. 24-120 I think is one of the most underestimated lenses on the market in most camera ranges. I know some camera systems have a 24-100 or whatever, but don't ignore having one like that, because that could be one of your best friends on a wedding day. Because let's say, for example, it's only you as a photographer on a wedding day, and the bride rocks up to the church and she comes out of the car. You're going to have to go from wide to close up, then wide for the spire of the church, then close up with the groom, and the wide of the bride walking down the aisle. Like, you have to change your cameras quickly, or simply shoot with a 24-120 and you get an incredible range. 24-70, you might say, is redundant because of that. Well, yeah, it sort of somewhat is. If you don't care about that extra f-stop, then you can save a lot of money by simply just going for the f4 version. So the 24-70 is covered within that, but it's f4, so you can cancel that out. If you've got back problems, or you want to carry a bit lighter, you can take that out, although 2.8 is going to be very useful. But you might have the shallower depth of field in the 85 1.8. The 50mm is also really, really cool, being at 1.4. We've already talked about the 14-24, and of course the macro is also one of my favorite lenses, because I love cropping in close. So I can use it as a normal 105mm compression lens, but I can go really close and dissect a face and photograph rings just like that. So this becomes a really incredible go-to lens. In fact, I remember many years in my career, this was like the only telephoto lens that I had. And not so much that I couldn't afford this one, it's just that served my purpose really well, and it was lighter, and that was it. I'm finding, as of 2020, I'm sort of using the 85 1.8 probably 80% of the time, where I'd say the 70-200 2.8 was my go-to longer focal length for quite a few years as well. So maybe it's a combination of being able to have that very shallow depth of field, but also have a light, longer compression, a nice portrait lens that I can play with as well. Speaking of compression, I'm sure you've probably seen this, or maybe you've done this as an exercise at home. If you haven't, you should. And that is, I want you to photograph the same subject matter with different compressions of a lens, because it's amazing what it does to a face. Even though that I'm actually giving you this information and you can digest it, it's in front of you, you just have to know what's going to happen. Well, here's what happens. I prefer a longer focal length because I think everyone looks prettier with a longer focal length. So let's start from this way, 24 mil. If you photograph head and shoulders, do you see how the ears disappear and the body disappears? And then you've got distortion of a face. Now you might say, well, why on earth would you actually do this? Well, you probably wouldn't. But how would I use this information on a real wedding day with real people? Well, is there a situation where you might have a plus size bride who would really appreciate her body disappearing and her face stays a certain size and her body just dwindles into nowhere without any liquefied oil? Of course, I wouldn't go as dramatic. So if you look at, say, 35 mil, do you see how her body looks smaller and her face looks reasonable without looking too distorted? So if you had someone with really big ears, you could shoot with a 35 mil up closer and the ears will disappear. Also, you could photograph at 28 mil or 24 mil of a plus size girl or a guy for that matter, and then allow a bit of breathing space and then the body will just disappear. See, it's funny because often comedians are photographed like this, where their head stays a certain size, photograph up above, and the body just disappears with tiny little feet. It's a form of ridicule. So even though we're doing it technically a mistake, it's purposeful because we want to actually, have a bit of comedy with this photograph. But you can use it purposefully in the right context. As we go to 50 mil, you would say 50 mil is sort of like the limit of a close-up shot where you don't get a ridiculous distortion. Now, when you compare it to 200 mil, then you start to see the difference. It's funny because have you ever had two colors in front of you and there's rose gold and there's gold, and then you put them together and you're like, oh, which one's richer? But then you look at it on their own